and I acted in a lot of shows, and I did a lot of Shakespeare, and I wanted to write a full-length show. And they say to write what you know. And I started writing. I grew up in northern Manhattan. I grew up actually north of Washington Heights, in a neighborhood called Inwood that is like from 200th Street to 218th Street. I still live there now. I'm very long train riding. And just sort of threw everything I had at it. And at that time, my favorite shows were West Side Story and Rent. So it was almost an exact mix of West Side Story and Rent. And it was an 80-minute one-act show. Benny and Nina were there, and Usnavi was there, but he was only in like 3 scenes. Vanessa was there. She was still Nina's friend. Nina's parents were there. All the characters existed, but it was a totally different story. Abuela hadn't shown up yet. Who else? The Salon Girls weren't in the original version. And then fast forward to sort of 8 years of work. I was very lucky. I found a director named Tommy Kail, who had graduated 3 years before me, who wanted to work on it. And together we found Alex Lacamoire, who played Wicked. We found Chiara, who wrote the book. Originally I was sort of doing everything myself, and I was going nuts. And Chiara really helped center the story and make it an amazing story. And then I wasn't even supposed to be in it. I had no ambition to be in it. It's more fun being the writer. You get to play all the parts when you're by yourself in your room, singing, crying in your room. You laugh. That's really what it looks like. And so it was one of those things. When you go into the professional world, there are these things called equity readings, where basically you can. You get these amazing actors, but you can only rehearse them for 29 hours. And we're called a 29-hour reading. So it's like a day, it's like 2 days of rehearsal, and then you do the reading that night. And we just couldn't find anyone who could do the Usnavi's raps and learn them in that short amount of time. So Tommy Kail said, why don't you play it for now, and we'll find a real actor. And that sort of never happened. I was in it, and then when we started, it was very convenient for readings when you're doing readings for producers to have the writer there and like kind of charmingly tap dance around the holes in the plot. And so, the producers, when Kevin McCullum, who produced Rent and was a chaperone in our show, saw it for the first time, he said, I don't know what the story is. This is before Chiara came on board. I don't know what the story is, but I really like the musical language, and I really like you as Usnavi. So then that was like, so now I had to be in it. And I've learned an enormous amount doing it. But that's the very long, sort of boring spiel on how Heights came to be. This is your time. I want to hear your questions. Yeah.
I'm Kristen, and my question is, I know that In the Heights was a huge, long, 8-year, 10-year process. What was the process like getting it from on paper to finally on Broadway?
Well, how long, Kristen? There are a lot of elements. One of the challenges for our show was that it's an original story. It wasn't based on any existing material except Chiara and my lives. And how do you structure that into a directing? So even Rent has La Bohème as a blueprint for what sort of the big points of what happens in the story. We would write a new song, and it would change 3 scenes in Act 2, because we really like the song, but now this doesn't make sense and this doesn't make sense. So it's kind of like doing a 12-sided Rubik's Cube, but every time you get a side lined up, someone's moved around the stickers on the other sides. That's really the best way to describe it. So it took a long time just because we were finding the story we wanted to tell and our way of telling it simultaneously. Luckily, we got the hardest part done, which was we had a creative team that we're all on the same page. Tommy is a great director, and he's a very inclusive director. It doesn't matter if the idea comes from an actor or from the set designer. If it's the best idea in the room, that's what we're going to go with. And so between Chiara, Bill Sherman, and Alex Lacamoire, Tommy, Andy Blankenbuehler, our choreographer, and I came last. Andy came last. We would sort of get in the room and bring in a song, and then we would all just throw ideas at it. The end of 96,000 is a great example of that song. When we had it on Broadway, we hadn't figured out the ending yet, and so we would be like, "We're never gonna stop," and the audience would go, like built the song in a way that they knew how to clap. We hadn't built what's called a button. And so I think we overcompensated a little bit when we got it to Broadway, because now it's got like 10 buttons on it. It's like you think it's over, and then it builds to another place, and then it builds to another place. And so it's it's lots of little, and that was a lot of us in the room, and Andy would do a move, and we'd go, oh, he'd go, I need it to be like, ga, 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 ga. And I'd go, and we sort of very slowly found it, but it's a lot. I would tell you, I cut more than 60 songs for the show. There are more than 60 songs I wrote for the show that just didn't make it in. And if there was a piece...
In the Heights, too.
In the Heights, too. The Legend of Abuela's Gold. Abuela and the Deathly Hallows. In the trunk. It's right. Questions? More questions? Yeah.
My name's Stephan. I just sort of was wondering how you got into rapping as sort of a musical theater element.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm sort of the same age as rapping. I'm 31. Hip hop started spoken word has been around as older than Shakespeare, but hip hop, as we know it, sort of started in the mid '70s in the Bronx, and I grew up. I was born in 1980, so I'm like you guys. There was never a time when rap didn't exist for me. So it was always just another musical element, and I loved it. I mean, I grew up with Beastie Boys and Fat Boys and a lot of boys, and just always loved it. And my friends always listened to it, and I remember getting into a fist fight over the last cassette of Scenario by Tribe Called Quest in 7th grade. You guys don't know what that is. But it was just always, and it was also, it's storytelling music. My favorite rap songs told stories, whether it was Biggie's Warning, or Jay-Z's Meet the Parents, or Eminem's Stan. My favorite hip hop also did what my favorite musical theater did. So I would always be disheartened when anytime I saw rapping in shows, it was always like as a punchline or as a commentary, like, oh, we're rapping. How crazy is that? And that was always sort of, disheartening to me, because it's an equally valid art form to me. And so, we just treated it like another form of storytelling. That being said, it would have been ridiculous if Abuela Claudia came out and was like, my name is Abuela, and we kind of treated it as another musical motif. So if it's Usnavi and Benny and Sonny, that's how they enter the world, and that's their musical language. Whereas Abuela, she sounds very old school mambo, old school Cuba, and it just becomes another way of varying your score. You learn this in elementary school music, but they play you Peter and the Wolf, and you hear the wolf's theme, and you hear Peter's theme on the flute, and that's how you build a score. You find the music that sounds like this character, that you feel like this is the beat this guy walks to down the street. And then you meet Vanessa, who walks in this double time beat, and then you smash the elements together, and that's how you build a score. It's the easiest way. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alexandria. My question is so when you were writing the characters, did it differ from when you hired the people to play, I guess, the off-Broadway cast? Did the people you chose for certain parts differ from how you originally expected them to be?